What's going on, everyone? In three, two, one. What's going on, everyone? This is the My Aggie Nation podcast. I'm Travis Brown with the Eagle, myaggieNation.com. Over there is Alex Miller. What's going on, Alex?
Not a lot, Travis. Just hanging here in the office on a Wednesday afternoon.
And we are so glad to be joined by John Pugliese, who is going to help us break down a little bit of Texas A&M basketball. John, what's going on, man?
Yeah, Travis, I appreciate you having me. I'm excited to be the phone a friend from Las Vegas, man.
I appreciate it. Yeah, for sure. So I know you've done some work for some other outlets around this area, but for the people who listen to our podcast, know our stuff, what's kind of your background and how'd you get into breaking down A&M basketball?
Yeah. So I was a college basketball coach for about a decade. I played collegiately. I'm from the Midwest, actually, but I went to the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, which is a really rich Division III tradition. If anyone's college basketball fans, it's where Bo Ryan got his start and won four national championships. I was really fortunate to start coaching collegiately right away. I worked for Mike Dean, who was the head coach at Marquette, and Lamar and Siena and a bunch of other places. And I worked for him at Wagner College, which is a small Division I school in the Northeast, and coached Division II, coached Division III, coached AAU. I've kind of been all over the country, and then I coached overseas for a couple of years. My wife got her PhD from A&M, and so we moved to College Station in 2016 without really knowing anyone or having any connection to Aggieland. And I reached out to Gabe Bach from Texas A&M and got to start doing some breakdown of A&M basketball and joining the show when he was on there, and really enjoyed myself. And Gabe and I kind of expanded our talk about college basketball on the show, and I became a fan. Back to BK's days and their Sweet 16 run, and then into the Buzz Williams era. I love having it's been a long time, I guess, for you guys to know, like, when I was coaching college basketball, I didn't watch a lot of other games, right? So like I grew up a fan of the sport, and obviously coaching, I loved it, but I didn't have a team anymore. So I kind of started from scratch in A&M and adopted the Aggies as my team, and have watched all the games and gotten really in depth into what they do. So it's been fun to have someone to root for and to be able to break some stuff down and not have to worry about wins and losses.
Sure. So, of course, we know A&M is 18-11, 7-9 in conference play heading into the last two games of the regular season for them. They play Alabama tonight. We're actually recording this on Wednesday before the game happens. So, but we won't exactly know how that shakes out, but we want to talk about some things generally in the past and moving forward into the future. So, John, what have you seen from this A&M team so far that kind of has gotten them to this point? That included a really long win streak and a really long losing streak heading into these last two games?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this, is a tale of two seasons for them, really. I mean, you talk about starting 15-2 and having some great wins. I mean, and even the couple losses that they had were good games, and that was Wisconsin and TCU. I mean, Wisconsin has proven to be the best team in the Big Ten with their Big Ten championship that they won last night against Purdue. And then, they lost to a really good TCU team, and TCU's had a good season. So they start 15-2 and they have all these new pieces, right? And I think anytime you have new pieces and you start with a front loaded schedule that is a little bit soft, you don't really know what you have. I think A&M thought they turned a corner when they came back and beat Notre Dame, huge second half, right? And that went a really long way. But they didn't follow that game up with really high level competition. I mean, they lost to TCU, but they had New Orleans and then TCU, and then they played Oregon State, who's one of the worst Power 5 teams in college basketball, Northwestern State, and Dallas Christian. So you followed up a Maui Invitational that was actually here in Vegas. I was at the games where there were some highlights with some games that were softer. But their schedule set up perfectly for them, because after that they had four winnable games in the SEC with Georgia, Arkansas, Ole Miss, and I think Missouri, and they go 4-0, right? And people are starting to talk about their chances at making an NCAA tournament, and they're 15-2, and then you look at their calendar and their schedule, and you think, this is a gauntlet right now, And so people always talk about like the next 3 games or next 4 games. Well, when I had any conversations with any, I said the next 8 games are going to make or break this year, and I mean, I'm on tape somewhere saying that exact thing. Like, don't talk about the next 4. It is the next 8. And they lost 8 in a row, with good, against good opponents. And what I told everyone, all they needed to do was split, which means that they beat 4 teams that they can beat, or 3 teams that they can beat, and they at least win 1 game that they probably shouldn't. Because it was Kentucky, Arkansas, who they'd already beaten, LSU, South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU again, and Auburn. And when you look at that, you say, okay, we can beat South Carolina, we can beat Mizzou. We should be able to split with LSU because we've got them at home and on the road. And then what other game can you win? Well, we've already beat Arkansas, but we got to go to Bud Walton. But, instead they lose 8 in a row. And so then you're trying to figure out, like, where do we go as a coaching staff, and how do we turn this thing around? And so they beat Florida and they lose to Vandy, and then they win games against Ole Miss and Georgia, but they have 0 quad 1 wins. They haven't been good against the top 100. I think the biggest, and I know I'm kind of going on a rant here, but I think the biggest kicker for them was that loss at LSU when they had it. Like, that was LSU was without 2 starters. They had A&M had so much going in their favor in that game. LSU looked discombobulated at times. You were coming off the loss in overtime to Arkansas, which today isn't a bad loss. So if you can win that LSU game, maybe you're on the right track. And they couldn't get back to it. And this team has struggled for a lot of reasons. But their schedule was the kicker. It was that 8-game stretch.
There's kind of been some mixed feelings about Buzz Williams this season. Obviously, they started really hot, and as we've pointed out, went through that pretty tough stretch. But what have you kind of made from him as a coach? It's year 3, but he's really kind of had to start over a couple of times, especially after last year season really getting derailed by COVID.
So I think people often take my analysis of Buzz and the job he's done at A&M as like I'm a Buzz hater. I'm not. I'm actually a really big Buzz fan going back. Both my parents are Marquette grads. My dad was the president of the Marquette Booster Club back in the early 90s. Like, I grew up a ball boy at Marquette. So, like, I have an affinity for Marquette basketball, and I was a really big fan of Buzz Williams at Marquette. He was at Marquette when I was at Wagner. Actually, if it wasn't for a mistake on our staff's part, the Jimmy Butler experiment at Marquette would have never happened, because we had Jimmy coming to Wagner, which is wild to think about, but he was a JUCO kid without a lot of people interested in him. But I think Buzz took a route when he got the job, 2018. He took a route in 2018 that you take in 2010 or 2005 or 1999. You keep your players on the roster. You try and bring in a couple freshmen late, and you try and build up the roster back up like that. That's something you did in 2000. In college basketball and today, if you look at the staffs that were hired at the same time as Buzz Williams, all of those staffs came in and they quick turned over rosters, right? They went transfers, they went grad transfers, they brought in all these guys, right? Well, he had he had Nebo and Chuck Mitchell. I mean, he had Andre Gordon, who was a freshman. He had Yeezy Gall-Taken. He had Emmanuel Miller, but like unproven guys. And then, he had Mitchell and he had Nebo and I think did he have Quinn Jackson in his first year?
Yes, he did.
Jackson in his first year, right? So like, he didn't take the route that Eric Musselman has taken everywhere that Eric Musselman has been. He didn't take the route that Nate Oates took when he got the Alabama job. These were guys hired at the same time. I gave that hire an A+. I loved the Buzz Williams to A&M for a lot of reasons, but he didn't take the route that everyone else took, and it put them behind. And they were bad offensively for 2 years. I mean, last year you can throw it away if you want, or you can keep it, whatever, but they were bad. And this year you saw turnover. Marcus Williams, right? Henry Coleman. You got all these guys coming in, plus some high-level freshmen with Wade Taylor. And, I still am really excited about Ashton Smith. There's a lot of guys I'm excited about on this roster with the development of a guy like Quentin Jackson. You got Ethan Henderson from Arkansas, Javonte Brown from UConn. You turned over this roster, and the headliner for him, besides Henry Coleman, they were really relying on Marcus Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell based on the first 20 games of this year. Look at his stats, look at his usage, look at his involvement in pick and rolls, but they weren't playing anybody. And Marcus Williams was still in Wyoming Mountain West mode. This is the SEC, man. And so I thought they really did him a disservice offensively. I thought we were going to see these sweeping changes, and it's the third year in a row where this team has struggled. And I like Buzz for a lot of the things he does. I'm not a big, the hashtags and the social media. And I don't love that stuff. It's just not what I grew up in as a coach. But they've struggled offensively. They've shifted a lot defensively, and they hitched their wagon to Marcus Williams, and that experiment didn't work. And I think a lot of where they are today has to do with that. And not really knowing kind of who they were as a team. But this is a good roster. I love the question because, the one thing I give Buzz credit for, this roster has SEC talent. It's not like it's not full of talent. It has SEC talent. They just haven't figured out the buttons to push. And again, that 8-game losing streak just killed them.
Yeah, when I hear conversations and people talking about how some of these are the worst losses and this is a bad basketball team. I mean, last year was a bad basketball team. When you want to look at guys like Henry Coleman, Wade Taylor, the guy that I think I got to go see a practice, and I realize it's one practice worth of sample size, but it's more than some people get to see. And Manny Obaseki was just tearing it up. I think he has the ability to be, there's some good building blocks to this team, and some good building blocks that for some of them have already used up their transfer. So it's like my fiance likes to say, it's like freezing a white elephant gift. It's locked. They're locked up. Do you see the pieces for the future there when you look at this squad?
I do. I mean, I don't think, without an inside look, I mean, I watched Manny in high school and I watched him play AU, and his game translates to this level. I think he's going to be I think he has the potential to be a star in the SEC in sophomore, junior year. I think the problem that they're running into is, one, size in SEC play, and is two, I think they've changed a lot on the fly throughout the year. Meaning Javonte Brown started the first handful of games. Then they went away from Javonte. And this is just my opinion, but they had success going small against Notre Dame in the second half, and they won that game because of Aaron Cash and his ability to switch five guys and then play a little bit smaller with Henry Coleman at the 5. And they lost track of who they wanted to be early in the year with Javonte Brown and Ethan Henderson and Henry Coleman and Aaron Cash kind of being like a 4-headed monster for 2 positions. And when you bring in guys like Manny, and you have Tyrese Radford, who's at the end of his stop, who, Buzz knew really well, like, you can't bring in guys and not play them, because in the future, what's going to happen? Mm-hmm. Transfers and recruits are going to say, well, you only played Manny Obaseki, who was a 94 grade on ESPN's top, 15, 5 minutes a game. Why would I come play for you? or you sat Marcus Williams halfway through the year. Why would I come play for you? So like there is that side of it. Travis, I think this team is in a good spot for the future because, like you said, can they leave? Not without having to sit out. I mean, Marcus Williams can go wherever he wants, but he's going to have to sit out a year. But I also like their young guys. And I think if these guys stick around, I think it's a good team. Like, I wish Quinn Jackson had a 7th year of eligibility. Because I think he's coming into his own. And I really like Aaron Cash. And I think Andre Gordon is one of the better leaders in the country in college basketball. And I don't think he gets enough credit. But it'll be interesting what kind of turnover happens after this year, because you always see it. Like, does Hassan Diarra want to play behind Wade Taylor, who's kind of taking the ball? Is Marcus Williams going to leave? Does Javonte Brown want to stick around? Depending on who they're bringing in, like, what's Ashton Smith going to do? Is Manny happy? I mean, there's a lot of questions that I don't think we know the answers to. And I think it's been impressive that they kept this team together the way they did. Obviously, without Marcus, and we'll see what happens. Obviously that's kind of the outlier.
Yeah. For those of you who haven't kept up, Marcus Williams hasn't played in the last 3 games. Buzz Williams said it's an indefinite leave of absence for him. And they said, when asked if he would be welcome back to the fold, if he wanted to come back to the program, he said, we'll have to see how that shakes out. Question I've asked a couple of the guys, and I know a lot have said of this program and the way they're recruiting next year. I think from rankings, they're in about the 80s for the next recruiting class. But from what we talked about in this team turnover in the transfer portal era, how much can you weigh into a recruiting class the next year until you see what the transfer portal shakes out? And kind of a side note to that, how much of Buzz Williams' success here is going to be hinged on here in the next year or two being able to bring in an actual impact 5?
Yeah, I mean, like, could you imagine this team with Josh Nebo?
Yeah.
I mean, like, honestly, Josh Nebo was not he played at St. Francis, Pennsylvania, in the same league that I coached in at Wagner. Like, Josh Nebo was not someone who a lot of people were super excited about, right? Like, but could you imagine if you had a guy like him? But here's the problem. Like, anytime you talk about, like, how about an impact 5? Well, who's he going to play with? Because Henry Coleman is not a stretch 4. Henry Coleman and he's not a back to the basket 5.
Yeah.
He's a 15 feet in guy. So unless you're doing something to really connect the 4 and the 5 where the stretch big isn't necessary, then getting another big, which you need, is almost moot unless you go high-low and you play like Tommy Lloyd is at Arizona with the 2 bigs. And, like, that's been the thing to me that's missing. It's not necessarily the size. I mean, it is size is important, but it's a stretch guy, because Aaron Cash, I mean, I know his stats from junior college say he shot like 45% from 3, but I think I've seen him take 2 threes and both hit. I don't know if they hit the rim, so like, I think some of it is the combination. When you play guys like Ethan Henderson and Henry Coleman together, well, they are the same player, and like Javonte Brown is not super skilled, but when he plays with energy and effort, like he's a strong contributor on the floor. But I think they need to bring in stretch guys with size, because I think, in my opinion, that's what they're missing. They're missing a guy who can, roll and then replace out to the top of the key and be a threat. And then you can dump it down low to a guy like Henry Coleman and he can make a play. But yeah, they have to bring in someone who can be an impact guy. The God's honest truth is here, Travis, is it's not happening in the high school market today. If you're not one of the, blue bloods who's getting a top 10 pick. So you have to go transfer portal. And is someone going to want to come in and play for them? I also think you need some size on the wing, and Manny is a high level guy with the ball in his hands, but he's 6'2". Tyrese Radford 6'2". Their guards are 6 foot and below, except for maybe Marcus Williams, who's 6'2". So they don't have 6'5" guys on the wing. Even Q plays like he's 6'7", but Q's 6'3". So I think they need some size on the wing. I think they need someone down low, but I think they need stretch guys and skill guys to combine with like what Buzz's teams always have been, which is like toughness, grit, intensity, fire, and like a refuse to lose attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Well, John, we've kind of been looking at the future, but in the here and now, right now, as A&M's kind of closing the home stretch of this regular season, Alabama tonight on the road, a winnable game against Mississippi State on Saturday, kind of looking at this season in particular, you kind of had the high of highs and the low of lows. Mid-January, you're starting to question maybe this team could potentially not sneak into the NCAA tournament. And then a couple weeks ago, you're wondering if they're ever going to win a game again. I think Travis and I did the math. Bearing A&M losing their last 3 games, they're still likely to make the NIT. Do you see this season as a success, and kind of where do you see the Aggies heading as they close out the regular season into the SEC tournament?
I think everybody was pretty excited because, in year 3 at Marquette and year 3 at Virginia Tech, he took those teams to the NCAA tournament. He took over a really bad situation at Virginia Tech and did a great job. At Marquette, he took over Tom Crean's Final Four run, and he got him back to the tournament every year except for his last and Sweet 16 in year 3. I think the NIT is a win because I think postseason is a win. Them making the NIT is going to be a product of these qualifying teams and the conference tournaments, right? Like this is not a lock because the NIT also really cares about the type of revenue you can bring in at the gate. So there's a lot that goes into that. I don't think this year is a failure, despite a lot of fans probably feeling like it is because of that huge 8-game losing streak. I mean, you had everyone. Look at like the Kentucky game and the LSU game, and Reed Arena was packed, and people were excited. And so, to me, the failure is that you couldn't keep those fans engaged because of that losing streak that you went on. BK's last couple of years at A&M, the arena was widely full. I went to games against Missouri and different teams. It was a full arena, not packed house full, but it was full on, both levels and everywhere. So I think, to me, the disappointment is that they couldn't keep the fans engaged by winning a couple games in that 8-game losing streak. I think the future has everything to do with the next 5 months, because at some point you're going to look at this. Buzz Williams is like the 3rd or 4th highest paid head coach in the country. At some point you're going to have to look at this and say the experiment was a failure. We got to bring in someone who could turn this over quickly. And you've invested a lot of resources in Buzz Williams. I think he's been, what was he at? He was at Virginia Tech for 5 years and Marquette for 6, and combined 9 or 10 NCAA tournaments between those 2 places, and he hasn't been able to do that. So I think it's a failure because they didn't keep everyone engaged and they had that run of losses. I think this team could make a run in the NIT if they can get a decent draw, because they still play in the SEC, which is a top 3 league in the country. So I do think there is still a glimmer of hope, which can do a lot with an NIT run. I know it's not the sexy pick, right? But like, you go to the Final Four in the NIT, you host some games in the NIT, you play against some good competition and win some of those games, you'll have me probably singing a different tune.
Yeah, for sure. So, me and Alex aren't the basketball guys. What did we miss? What have you seen from this team? What do you see moving forward that needs to be pointed out about this team, not only heading into these final 2 games postseason, but into that key important summer you said?
Yeah, Quentin Jackson, like I know I've talked about Q, but Quentin Jackson is the type of guy who makes an NBA roster as a 2-way player or a 10-day contract guy, and he ends up filling a role. I know I have some good friends who are NBA draft writers, and A&M hasn't gotten a lot of love because they don't have a lot of guys, right, who are seniors or are going to be in that position. But Q is a guy who I think will impress a lot of people if he can get some invites and things like that. Wade Taylor has been terrific. I mean, Wade's still a freshman, so he makes freshman mistakes, but it's really, and I'll actually throw Hassan Diarra into that, because they both have a connection to winning that I think is really difficult to look past. Like, these guys are guys who are hungry, they're into it. I think Henry Coleman has been a good surprise, considering he really didn't get any burn at Duke. And it's a guy who's averaging, I don't know what his season numbers are, but 12-6, 13-6, or 10-6, something like that. In my opinion, for this team, a lot is going to be, hey, what happens here? Like, does Hayden Hefner come back? Like, I have no knowledge of this, but does a guy like Hayden Hefner come back when he doesn't really have a role? It's probably too high of a level for him. Does he transfer, and do you have a spot to bring in, a guy like, what are they going to do with Tyrese Radford's spot? What are they going to do with some of these other guys? And what happens with Marcus Williams? I think those are big pieces. The last two games, I mean, this Bama game, they beat Gonzaga and Houston and Tennessee and Baylor and LSU, and they've lost to Kentucky twice, Georgia, Mississippi State, Missouri, and Davidson. Like, you win this game and you beat Mississippi State on senior night, and you go into the SEC with a couple more wins under your belt, and you're feeling pretty good about yourself to try and advance a little bit, because there are some teams in the SEC who are hanging on by a thread. SEC is probably 6 teams in the NCAA tournament, and those teams today are Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, Bama, and LSU. But can Florida win enough games in the SEC tournament to sneak in? And does LSU lose a couple, or lose, a game early? Like, is Mike White's job riding on it? Like, there's some exciting storylines in SEC play right now that aren't getting the attention because it's not the Big 12 right now, or the Big 10.
For sure. Well, that's about all the time we have this week for the My Aggie Nation podcast, but we're so glad to have a Las Vegas bureau of the podcast now. And we will be definitely leaning on you a little bit more in the weeks to come, as it looks like there will be some more postseason play for the Aggies, should they be able to take care of their business. Again, also we have A&M baseball up at the Frisco Classic this weekend, getting their first bout at some Power 5 play. We'll see if they can get some run support for those pitchers, which has been a little bit of an issue for them as of late. We'll talk about that probably a little bit more next week after that all shakes out. So for John and Alex, I'm Travis Brown. This is the My Aggie Nation podcast, and we'll see you next week.